I had just slipped into the burgundy dress I bought for Hannah's farewell dinner when my phone buzzed with a message that froze me in place. I was standing in front of the mirror in my little Portland apartment, adjusting the neckline, imagining how surprised she'd be when she saw I actually took a night off just to celebrate her. For a moment, I felt almost included, almost like a real sister. Then the screen lit up. Change of plans. You're not invited tonight. Hannah wants only family there. Only family. The words hit me so hard my hand went numb. The mug of tea slipped from my fingers and shattered against the floor, but I couldn't move. I just stared at the message, rereading it over and over, like maybe the meaning would somehow change the fifth time. It didn't. Only family. I whispered it aloud, and something inside me cracked so quietly, I almost missed it. In that moment, a truth I'd spent my entire life refusing to look at rose right to the surface. Maybe I was never truly family to them at all. I sank down onto the edge of my bed dress, pooling around me like I was rehearsing for a celebration I was never meant to attend. My fingers trembled as I typed back, "Why am I not invited?" But Linda didn't pick up when I called. Instead, she sent another message, each word like a slap. "It's her last night here. She wants it intimate. Please don't make this hard. Intimate. Don't make this hard." Like I was some distant acquaintance forcing myself into a private moment. Like I wasn't the one who spent months helping her prepare for this move. Like I hadn't paid $9,600 so she could start her dream life in Florence without stressing over flights deposits or supplies. Like I was an extra useful, but not part of the real story. My chest tightened as memories began to swirl together in a rush I couldn't control. The way Linda always called Hannah our girl, how her eyes sparkled with pride every time Hannah entered a room. Meanwhile, I was, what? The organized one, the responsible one, the adopted one, the daughter they told their friends made them look generous. I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from crying out. Not because of the dinner god, it wasn't about the dinner. It was the sudden clarity that came with that text. A clarity I'd spent years trying to bury under good deeds, financial support, and the desperate hope that one day they'd see me the way I saw them. I stood abruptly, needing air, needing space. That was when the silver box on the top shelf of my closet caught my eye. The box Aunt Valerie gave me on my 25th birthday with the strange message, "Open this when you feel invisible." I'd laughed back then. I thought she was being dramatic. Now the words burned in my mind. I pulled it down and held it, but my hands shook too much to open it. I set it on the nightstand, promising myself I would later. My phone buzzed again. For a moment my heart lifted, thinking maybe Hannah was texting, maybe she found out, maybe she'd defend me. It wasn't her. Linda had sent a group photo from their living room. Hannah, at the center, relatives clustered around her, wine glasses raised. The caption read, "Celebrating our girl before she heads to Italy." Our girl. I realized suddenly all those years of feeling like I was orbiting their world, never in it. All those times I told myself I was overthinking. Every birthday when mine was overshadowed by Hannah's, every Christmas picture where I stood on the edge of the frame, every family decision made without me, every college tour they took her on while telling me, "You're smart, Marissa. You'll figure it out." They weren't slips. They weren't oversights. They were patterns. A soft ping pulled me out of the spiral. A notification from the bank, international transfer pending. The first rent payment for Florence. $2,050 waiting for me to approve. The timing felt cruel, almost mocking. I stared at the screen, feeling heat rise in my chest. Why was I paying rent for someone who wouldn't even invite me to say goodbye? Another memory rose, Valerie taking my hand during a 4th of July barbecue years ago, her voice low so Linda wouldn't hear. "Sweetheart, you shine too bright for a family that keeps you dim." Back then I didn't understand. Now her words stung with truth. My phone rang, suddenly startling me. Hannah's name flashed on the screen. My breath caught. I hit accept, but the line went straight to voicemail. She hadn't meant to call. She must have been checking her phone in the middle of the party. Still, hearing the faint noise of celebration behind that accidental call made something inside me wilt. They were all together, laughing, drinking, toasting, and I was sitting alone in a dress meant for a night no one wanted me at. The walls of the apartment suddenly felt too close. I forced myself to breathe. I wasn't going to spiral. Not tonight. Not over this. I walked slowly back to the bed, lifted the silver box, and sat down. I wasn't ready to open it yet, but holding it grounded me somehow. Valerie had known. Maybe she'd always known. As the rain began tapping on the window, I let the dress fall off my shoulders. I didn't bother putting it back in the closet. I wasn't sure I could even look at it again. My phone buzzed one last time. For a second, hope rose in my throat. Maybe Hannah, maybe Frank, maybe anyone checking if I was okay. It was Linda. Be mature about this. I dropped the phone onto the bed and stared at the ceiling, swallowing a mix of grief and fury I didn't have the strength to name. The question echoed in my mind, sharper than anything Linda had said. If I'm not family, then what exactly have I been? All these years I turned toward the window, letting the cool night air brush against my skin, and whispered into the dark, "Don't know how much more of this I can take." That was when my phone vibrated again, a single incoming call. Hannah. This time she wasn't calling by accident, and I had no idea which answer would hurt worse, hearing she knew I'd been excluded, or hearing she didn't care at all. When I finally worked up the nerve to call Hannah back, she didn't answer. The phone rang once, then went straight to voicemail, like she had declined the call the moment she saw my name. I lowered the phone slowly, my heart sinking, with a heaviness I couldn't hide anymore. I wasn't sure what hurt more, being excluded from the dinner, or realizing my own sister didn't feel the need to even pick up the phone. I sat down on the couch, wrapping my arms around myself, as if that could keep all the hurt from spilling out. The apartment was too quiet. My breathing felt too loud. I kept hearing the faint echoes of laughter from that accidental call, imagining the warm lights of Linda's living room, the clinking glasses, the proud smiles. All of it happening without me, like I had never belonged there in the first place. My phone chimed again. I grabbed it quickly, hoping for a message from Hannah, or maybe Frank. Instead, it was an automated alert. Payment reminder, Florence lease, pending verification. Guarantor M. Cole. Guarantor. My stomach twisted. I opened the email, reading the line again and again. Why would I be the guarantor? I'd agreed to help with the deposit, yes. But guarantor. That wasn't what we discussed. I scrolled down and saw a scanned signature. My signature, or at least something that looked like it. My throat tightened. A cold rush of fear and anger slid through me. Had Linda sent them that scan of my ID? She asked for last month, just for a gift registry, she had said. It makes things easier. I hadn't questioned it. I should have. Before I could spiral further, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Hannah. Sorry, can't talk now. Mom said you're upset. We'll talk later. Just that. No explanation. No shock. No apology for the dinner. Nothing. I stared at it, feeling my pulse start to thud painfully in my ears. I typed back, "Did you ask Mom not to invite me?" and waited. The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, reappeared, then vanished for good. No reply. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to put the phone down before I said something I couldn't take back. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, letting the cool Portland night wash over me like a shock. The streetlights cast long shadows along the sidewalk, and for a moment I just stood there, breathing, grounding myself. I walked without direction, letting my feet carry me through the quiet neighborhood. The sound of rain beginning to fall lightly against the leaves brought a strange sense of calm. But it didn't last. Flashes of memory began to play in my mind, sharp and clear, as if they'd been waiting years for this moment to resurface. I saw myself at 12, standing next to the family car on the 4th of July, holding a plate of food, while Linda introduced Hannah as our girl to a neighbor. The neighbor looked at me and asked, "And who's this?" Linda had laughed and said, "Oh, that's Marissa. She helps around a lot." Helps around. I kept walking. Another memory hit my 15th birthday. I'd baked my own cake because Linda insisted she didn't have time for all that fuss. We celebrated 2 days late after Hannah's school dance performance. Linda had snapped at me when I asked for one picture with the family. "You're making everything about you," she'd whispered harshly. Then, in the photo, we finally took her hand rested proudly on Hannah's shoulder. I wrapped my jacket tighter around myself as the drizzle turned into rain. Then came another memory, this one from college. I'd gotten into the business program at Portland State with a partial scholarship. When I told Linda, she smiled politely and said, "That's nice. Do you think you'll manage the workload without making things difficult here?" As if my achievement was an inconvenience. Meanwhile, when Hannah submitted a single unfinished painting to a local youth exhibit, Linda threw a small party just to celebrate her boldness. The pain from all those years stacked up like bricks in my chest. When I eventually circled back toward my apartment, the rain had soaked through my hair, my jacket, my shoes. I didn't even care. I needed the clarity that came with cold air and wet skin. I needed something to remind me that I still had a body, a life, a voice, things that felt invisible inside that family. When I reached my building, I froze. There, standing under the small awning near the door, was Aunt Valerie. Her coat hood was pulled back, her gray hair frizzing slightly from the dampness. She held a paper bag in one hand, her eyes soft but deeply troubled when they met mine. "Marissa," she said gently, stepping toward me. "I couldn't sleep. I needed to see you." My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Valerie had always been the one person in the family who looked at me and really saw me. Not as the helper, not as the adopted one, just as me. "I got Linda's message earlier," she continued quietly, "about the dinner. And I thought, no, not this time." A sob threatened to burst out of me, but I forced it down. "I didn't want to bother anyone." She shook her head firmly. "You're not a bother, sweetheart. You never were." The sincerity in her voice nearly undid me. We walked inside up to my apartment, and I brought her a towel for her hair. She placed the paper bag on my counter. It was pastries from her favorite late-night bakery. She always brought pastries when she felt something in her bones was wrong. She looked around my apartment, seeing the dress on the bed, the phone on the floor, the shattered mug on the kitchen tiles. Her face tightened with understanding and sadness and something else, anger. "Sit," she murmured. "We need to talk." I sat across from her, hands clasped tightly. She reached across the table and covered my hand with her warm, steady palm. "You know," she said softly, "your mother has always had her own story she tells herself. And she's forced that story on everyone, even on you." I swallowed. "I keep thinking I'm overreacting." "You're not," she said instantly. "And you never were." Her words were an anchor in a storm. Valerie hesitated, then sighed deeply as if releasing something she'd held onto for years. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago," she said. "About when you first came into the family." My heart stumbled in my chest. She continued, voice low. "Linda, she said something to me the night you were adopted. Something I never forgot. She said Hannah needed someone to practice being compassionate on. Those were her words. She didn't see you as a daughter, Marissa. She saw you as a lesson, a responsibility, a tool." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Valerie squeezed my hand. "It was wrong then. It's wrong now. And it's the reason you've always felt on the outside. Because she made it that way from the beginning." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and blurring. Valerie walked to my closet and pulled out the silver box I'd set aside earlier. She placed it gently in front of me. "That box," she said softly, "is not for when you feel invisible. It's for when you finally see the truth." As she turned to leave, she paused in the doorway, her voice tender but resolute. "Before you give them any more of yourself, read what's inside." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet apartment with the box, the truth, and a pain that suddenly made more sense than it ever had before. I didn't open the silver box right away. I sat there staring at it, my fingers tracing the delicate pattern on the lid, as if the metal itself might give me courage. Valerie's words clung to me like mist, soft but impossible to ignore. She didn't see you as a daughter. She saw you as a lesson. The more I replayed it, the more something inside me tightened, coiling like a spring pulled too far for too long. The apartment felt unbearably silent. I stood abruptly, needing movement, needing purpose. I grabbed my laptop from the counter and brought it to the couch. If I couldn't face the truth in the box yet, I could at least face the truth in the numbers, the cold, clean math of what I had done for Hannah. Numbers didn't lie, people did. I opened the folder labeled Florence Project, the one I'd put together for myself, so I could keep track of every payment I made. There, it was color-coded and organized: the deposit for her apartment, the upgraded plane ticket she absolutely needed, the art supplies she insisted were essential, the clothing for her professional image, the visa fees, the travel insurance. $9,600. I stared at the total so long it blurred into nothing. I could practically hear Linda's voice echoing in the back of my mind. "You're so responsible, Marissa. You always know what you're doing with money. Responsible." The code word she used when she wanted me to pay for something. My inbox pinged. When I opened the email, my stomach dropped. Urgent verification needed for lease guarantor. I clicked through the attached document, and there it was again, my signature, perfectly placed, perfectly forged. My breath caught. A pressure rose in my chest so quickly and violently that for a second I thought I might be sick. I grabbed the phone and called Hannah. Straight to voicemail. Again. I tried Linda next. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom," my voice was tight, trembling. "Did you put my name down as the lease guarantor?" Linda sighed loudly, the way she always did when she thought I was being emotional. "Marissa, don't start drama. You know Hannah can't qualify on her own. You make more money. It just made sense. It made sense to forge my signature." "Oh, for heaven's sake," she snapped. "I had a scan of your ID from when I needed it for the registry last month. They just needed something to move things along. Don't overreact. It's family." Family. That word again. That word she only ever used when she needed something from me. "I didn't agree to this," I said quietly. "Well," Linda replied, "you didn't disagree either." Her tone hardened. "And Hannah needs this. Don't make things difficult." The call ended before I could respond. I stared at the phone, feeling the heat rise up my neck. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Difficult. That was her favorite word when I refused to fall in line. Convenient that none of this was difficult for her, only for me. I closed the laptop slowly, like if I moved too fast, everything would explode. Just as I stood to get some water, another memory crashed into me, the night I overheard Linda talking to her sister when she thought I was asleep. I must have been 10. I remember sitting on the staircase listening to her murmur into the phone. "She's fine," Linda had whispered about me. "She's independent. She's practically raising herself. But Hannah needs nurturing." I'd gone back to bed wondering why needing less meant being given less. I never got an answer. The ache of it hit me now with full force. I grabbed my jacket again and went outside. The night was colder, the wind sharper. I walked without knowing where I was going, just needing distance from the walls closing in around me. I passed a small playground, the same one I used to escape to when I was a teenager. I sat on one of the swings, gripping the cold chains. The memories flowed freely now. The college application season, when I asked Linda if she could read my essay, and she replied, "Honestly, all that academic stuff is more your thing. Hannah needs my help with her portfolio." She never read it. The night Hannah borrowed my laptop without asking and spilled paint on the keyboard. When I confronted her, she cried. And Linda turned on me instantly. "Why do you always have to make Hannah feel bad?" I ended up apologizing. "And paying for a new laptop? The dozens of times Hannah said she'd pay me back next month, but next month never came. The Christmas I saved 3 months' worth of paychecks to buy Linda a necklace she'd admired in a store window. She opened it, smiled politely, then gasped over the bracelet Hannah made from cheap beads. "This is so meaningful," she said, hugging Hannah tight. She never wore the necklace. I breathed out shakily. All these years I'd told myself those things didn't matter, that I was being sensitive, that I just needed to try harder, to be more patient, more understanding, more good. The truth hit me so hard I swayed on the swing. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a love that was never going to be given freely. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Why is the payment on hold?" landlord called. I closed my eyes. Of course Linda found out already. Of course she was making calls behind the scenes. The thought of dealing with her tonight was too much. Before I could decide what to do, the phone rang. Not Linda this time, not Hannah. The name on the screen made my breath catch. Frank, my father. I hesitated, thumb hovering. Frank rarely called. When he did, it was usually small talk. But tonight it felt like something else. I answered quietly. "Hi, Dad." He sighed the moment he heard my voice, and the sound alone made my chest tighten. "Marissa," he said, his voice heavy, I heard what happened tonight." I swallowed hard. "From who? Your mother," he said. "She's upset, but—" He paused, lowering his voice. "I'm upset too. With her." I didn't say anything. I barely breathed. "She shouldn't have excluded you," he said. "Not after everything you've done." It wasn't right. The world tilted. It was the first time in 30 years someone in that family said the words I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. I pressed a hand to my forehead, eyes stinging. "I don't know what to do, Dad." "I know," he replied quietly. "And I'm sorry. I haven't been the father you deserved." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. "I want to talk," he said. "Really talk. Can we meet tomorrow? Just us?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'd like that." When I hung up, I stayed on that swing until my fingers went numb from the cold. I wasn't ready to return to my apartment yet, but I finally stood once the wind grew too sharp. When I got back, I paused at the doorway, looking at my reflection in the darkened window. I didn't see the girl trying to fit into their world anymore. I saw someone exhausted, someone hurt, someone done. But for the first time, I also saw someone waking up. Inside the silver box waited on the table, still unopened. Still holding the truth Valerie said I needed before I gave my family another piece of myself. I took a deep breath, walked toward it, and reached out. This time, I didn't pull my hand back. I opened the silver box with hands that didn't feel like my own. The lid slid back easily, almost too easily for something that held so much weight. Inside was a single envelope, cream-colored, thick, slightly worn at the edges, as if it had been handled often before it ever reached me. My name was written across the front in Valerie's handwriting. Not Marissa. Not dear. Just my name, plain and unadorned. Direct. True. I sat on the edge of the bed, slipped a finger beneath the flap, and pulled the letter out. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to unfold it. My heart thudded in my throat, and I remembered Valerie's voice from earlier that night. "It's not for when you feel invisible. It's for when you finally see the truth." I inhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. Then I opened it. "Marissa," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've reached some breaking point. I wish I could be there to hold your hand as you walk through what you've been avoiding for years. But you need the truth to be yours alone." My breath hitched. "I need you to know," Valerie continued, "that none of this has ever been your fault. You were brought into that home with a label pinned on you before you could even speak. Pinned on me," I read on my eyes, skimming faster as dread built in my stomach. "Linda told me the night before the adoption went through that she didn't want another child. She didn't want to divide her attention. She didn't want to change her routines. But she said Frank insisted." My hand flew to my mouth. She told me she agreed only because she believed you would be independent, self-sufficient, low maintenance. Her words, not mine. She said having you in the house would teach Hannah compassion. You were never meant to be a daughter. Not in her story. You were meant to be the example. My chest tightened so painfully I had to set the letter down. I pressed the heel of my palm to my sternum and tried to breathe. But the truth was a heavy thing, one that didn't grant you air until after it broke you open. I picked the letter up again. I have watched you grow up with grace despite this. You became responsible because no one was responsible for you. You became self-sufficient because no one wanted the burden of caring for you. That is not a failure on your part. It is a failure on theirs. Tears blurred the words. I've tried to speak up over the years, but Linda insisted it was family business and that I was interfering. Frank stayed quiet to keep the peace. And you, sweet girl, just kept giving and giving, hoping someone would see how much you deserved more. A quiet sob escaped me. I am telling you all this not to hurt you, but to free you. You are not invisible. You are not difficult. You are not less. You were simply placed in a family that didn't understand the gift they were given. By the time I reached the signature with "Love, Aunt Valerie," I was shaking so badly the paper quivered in my hands. I folded it carefully, almost reverently, and placed it back in the box. The truth wasn't a comfort, but it was clarity. A guiding light in a room I'd been stumbling through in the dark for decades. When the tears finally slowed, I wiped my face and sat back, staring blankly at the wall. My mind was racing, but there was a numbness spreading through me, a strange, anchored calm beneath the storm. Linda didn't want me. She wanted what I could be useful for. She wanted an example, a helper, a comparison tool, a living lesson for Hannah. Not a daughter, never a daughter. And suddenly, every moment of exclusion, every brushed-off celebration, every dismissive comment, every forgotten birthday, every single thing clicked into place. I'd been trying to earn a place I was never meant to be given. My phone buzzed beside me. I flinched, half expecting Linda's name, but it was just a payment app notification reminding me that the Florence transfer was still pending. Pending for another 12 hours. That was it. 12 hours before the first month's rent automatically left my account. I closed my eyes. It was all too much, the forged signature, the exclusion from the dinner, the truth, in the letter, the decades of feeling like the outsider in my own home. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of memories that all suddenly made sense in the most devastating way. I couldn't sit still anymore. I got up, grabbed my coat, and left the apartment again. The night air slapped me awake as soon as I stepped outside. The streetlights glowed faintly in the light drizzle, and my breath came out in short, shaky bursts. I walked fast this time, shoes splashing through shallow puddles. At the end of my block was the little park I had always avoided at night, too open, too exposed. Tonight it felt like the only place I could breathe. I sat on a damp bench and let the rain settle onto my hair, my jacket, my jeans. It soaked into me until I felt as cold outside as I did inside. Everything in the letter pulled me backward, back to the small moments of childhood where the truth had always been hiding. I remembered being 6 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, coloring quietly, while Linda and one of her friends talked in the corner. I heard Linda say, "She's not needy, thank God." I couldn't handle another child wanting that much from me. I hadn't understood it then. I do now. I remembered being 9 when Hannah came home crying from school because another girl got chosen for the lead role in the play. Linda held her and comforted her for an hour. When I later came to the kitchen quietly and said I'd gotten a perfect score on my spelling test, Linda smiled quickly and said, "That's nice, sweetheart," then went right back to soothing Hannah. As if my achievements weren't emotional enough to require anything from her. I remembered being 13 when I asked Linda why I wasn't in more photos. She laughed, shook her head, and said, "Oh, you're always off doing your own thing. Hard to catch you." But I remember sitting still on picture days, waiting for her to call me over. She never did. Each memory was a bruise I didn't know I had until someone pressed down on it. I don't know how long I sat in the rain, piecing together the version of my childhood I'd always wanted to believe versus the one that had actually happened. Eventually, the cold began to seep too deeply into my bones, and I forced myself to stand. When I got back to my apartment, I dried my hair, changed into warm clothes, and sat at my desk with a cup of tea. My planner lay open in front of me, the Florence expenses listed neatly in blue ink. Next to it sat my phone screen, dark, waiting. As I stared at those numbers that forged signature the truth from Valerie's letter, and all the years of being the helper child, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the clarity. Maybe it was the realization that I had been compensating for a mother's love that was never meant for me. Whatever it was, I felt it take root. I whispered into the silence, I can't keep doing this. When the phone buzzed again, Hannah's name lighting up the screen, I didn't reach for it immediately. I let it ring once, twice, then I picked it up, pressed accept, and said quietly, "We need to talk." For the first time in my life, the words didn't feel like a plea. They felt like a beginning. The morning after Valerie left, I woke up feeling like my body had absorbed a weight I couldn't shake off. My eyes were swollen, my limbs heavy, but there was a strange alertness beneath the exhaustion, as if my mind knew something was coming, something I could no longer ignore. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, half expecting Linda to have filled it with accusations, half afraid she had. Instead, there was a single new email. The subject line made my stomach drop. RE Guarantor verification required. My pulse spiked as I opened it. Dear Miss Cole, we require a copy of your ID and updated bank statements as the primary financial sponsor for Miss Hannah Cole's Florence apartment. We must receive documentation by end of day. Primary financial sponsor. I blinked hard as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. They didn't. I scrolled down and froze when I saw the signature line again, that familiar false version of my name placed neatly on the digital contract. A tremor ran through me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately put me down as the person financially responsible for the entire lease. I hit reply. I did not agree to be the guarantor. Please remove my name immediately. Before I could hit send, my phone lit up with an incoming call. Hannah, I answered quickly. Hey, I just saw she cut me off sounding annoyed. Why are you emailing the landlord? You're freaking them out. I'm freaking them out. My voice cracked in disbelief. Hannah, I never agreed to be your guarantor. There was a pause, then a sigh. It's not a big deal. They needed someone. You make the most money. Mom said you'd handle it. Handle it, I repeated, heat building behind my eyes. This is thousands of dollars. What if you miss a payment? What if something happens? My credit, my savings, my future is tied to this. You're overreacting, she muttered. Again, the words sliced through me like glass. Overreacting. How many times had Linda used that word to silence me? I forced myself to keep breathing. Hannah, this is serious. You forged my signature. Mom handled the paperwork, not me. She shot back quickly, almost too quickly. And she said it was fine. Of course Linda did. Before I could respond, Hannah added, Look, I have to go. Mom's calling. Just stop making it complicated. Then she hung up. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling. My heart wasn't breaking anymore. It was waking up. I got up needing space, needing clarity. I drank a glass of water, but it did nothing to cool the heat in my chest. I grabbed my laptop again and opened the folder of expenses. $9,600. Sacrificed without hesitation, and now they wanted me to be liable for the entire lease. A knock on the door startled me. I opened it to find a delivery bag, no sender listed. Inside was a bagel and coffee from the cafe near Valerie's house, along with a small note. Eat something. And stand up for yourself today. I sat down, clutching the note like a lifeline. I hadn't even mentioned the guarantor nightmare to her yet. Somehow she always knew when something was off. I took a sip of the coffee and let the warmth settle my nerves. My phone buzzed again, another email from the landlord. This one included an updated copy of the lease. I opened it reluctantly and froze. Not only was my signature on the guarantor line, but there was a small stamp in the corner, uploaded by L. Cole. Linda had done it. A shiver of anger ran through me. My hands curled into fists. That wasn't an oversight. That wasn't miscommunication. That was fraud. I closed the laptop and paced the room, the anger simmering hotter with each step. I finally grabbed the phone and called Linda. She answered on the second ring, sounding irritated. "Marissa, I'm busy. Make it quick. You uploaded my signature to the landlord." A beat of silence. Then dismissively, "Yes, I did. Hannah needed it." My breath left me in a rush. "You committed fraud." "Oh, for God's sake," she snapped. "Don't be dramatic. It's family. You're helping your sister. What's the problem?" "The problem," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "is that I did not consent. You forged my name, and now the entire lease is tied to me." Linda scoffed. "It's not like you can't afford it." My vision blurred with fury. "That's not the point," she sighed impatiently. "Well, Hannah is overwhelmed. She can't handle these logistics." "You always make things so complicated, Marissa. Just sign the email the landlord sent and send them the documents." "I'm not sending anything," she sounded shocked. "Excuse me, I am not the guarantor." "I never agreed to be the guarantor." "You will fix this." Linda's tone sharpened instantly. "Marissa, don't you dare put this on me. Hannah is counting on you. You will do this." End of discussion. She hung up. I stared at the dead screen, chest heaving. She ordered me, like a servant, like a resource, like a tool. And maybe for most of my life I had been exactly that. But something was shifting. Something inside me that felt too solid to ignore now. I sat back down, rubbing my temples in frustration. I needed a plan. As I stared at the table, my eyes landed on the list Linda had texted Hannah earlier in the week. The one Hannah had forwarded to me, with the careless expectation I'd buy everything. Orthopedic mattress, important for her backstanding art. Easel essential, Italian sketchbook set better quality. Wardrobe pieces she needs to look professional abroad. Fee previous unpaid balance $420. My eyes narrowed. That line at the bottom. Previous unpaid balance. Linda had assured me everything was covered, but clearly it wasn't. A new fear crept in. What else hadn't they told me? My phone buzzed again. Another email from the landlord. "Your signature has already been verified by Miss Cole. Please forward documentation." Verified. By Linda. I pressed a hand to my forehead. This wasn't help. This wasn't support. This wasn't family leaning on family. This was manipulation. This was entitlement. This was betrayal wrapped in the language of obligation. The realization rippled through me like a crack in glass, spreading, widening, deepening. I pressed my eyes shut and exhaled. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being dramatic. I was seeing clearly for the first time. A faint knock pulled me from my thoughts. I opened the door expecting another delivery. Instead, I found Aunt Valerie, again raincoat, still damp, her expression grave. She stepped inside, placed a hand on my arm, and said quietly, "They're doing it again." I swallowed. "Doing what?" She hesitated, then looked toward the silver box on the table. "You don't know what Linda told the family when she adopted you, do you?" The room seemed to tilt. I shook my head slowly. Valerie exhaled with something like heartbreak. "Before you give them another $1, she whispered, "you need to read the letter in that box." She squeezed my arm gently and added, "And Marissa, the truth isn't there to hurt you. It's there to free you." I watched her leave again, the door clicking softly behind her, the world suddenly too quiet. My eyes drifted to the silver box. It waited patiently, almost knowingly, on the table. Whatever was inside, it was time. I woke the next morning feeling strangely hollow, the kind of emptiness that comes right before something breaks. For a moment, the apartment was still and quiet, and I almost convinced myself that today might be easier than yesterday. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it, expecting maybe a message from Frank, or even another quiet check-in from Aunt Valerie. But what flashed across my screen wiped the breath from my lungs. About tonight's party, we've decided to keep it to just immediate family. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to attend. Hannah wants only family. Only family. I stared at the words until they blurred. My hand began to tremble. Then, as if to drive the knife deeper, another message appeared, this time shorter, colder. Please don't make this difficult. My ears rang. My vision blurred. A deep, heavy nausea rolled through me. Only family. Please don't make this difficult. I read the messages again, slower this time, letting the meaning settle, letting the cruelty bloom fully. Immediate family. Not me. Never me. I sat up too fast, the room tilting. My throat closed as though someone had placed a hand around my neck and gently squeezed. I typed back with shaking fingers. I don't understand. Am I not family too? The typing dots appeared for a moment, then vanished, then appeared again, then vanished for good. A minute later, my phone rang. Linda's name flashed across the screen. I pressed answer, hardly managing a whisper. Mom. Her voice came through sharp, irritated. Marissa, why are you making this awkward? Hannah wants a small, intimate evening with the people she's known her entire life. I've been in her life for almost 30 years, I said, my voice breaking. You know what I mean, Linda snapped. Blood family. Her grandparents, her cousins, the people she shares history with. I pressed a fist against my sternum, feeling something inside me fracture. I thought I was family. Linda sighed dramatically. Please don't start. You're overthinking this. You always do. Hannah wants to reminisce without worrying about how you'll feel. She doesn't want this to turn into some emotional scene. My mouth fell open. I wouldn't make a scene. Well, you're already upset, she said flatly. And we want tonight to be pleasant. Pleasant. Translation easier without me. I closed my eyes and all at once decades of tiny exclusions rose like ghosts. The birthdays where Linda forgot the cake for me but not for Hannah. The photos I wasn't in. The family trips I learned about after they were booked. The comments about how independent I was, as if my self-sufficiency wasn't forced on me from the minute I entered that house. Please understand, Linda, continued softer but not kinder. Hannah needs a peaceful night. She doesn't need to worry about you being hurt. She doesn't need to worry about me, I whispered. Because she won't see me. Linda ignored that. You always take things so personally, Marissa. That's why I didn't want to bring this up. We just want tonight to be special. And it will be, if you let it, if I let it, as though I was the problem. As though this was about my behavior, and not their rejection. My voice came out barely audible. What did I do wrong? For heaven's sake, Linda muttered. Nothing. Stop turning this into something it's not. Hannah wants only family there, and that's final. Please don't make this difficult. Be a good girl. Good girl. The words hit me so hard my skin went cold. She was 58, I was 32, and she still spoke to me like I was a child expected to obey. Like my compliance was the only acceptable role I could play. Okay, I managed, though the words scraped like sandpaper against my throat. I won't come. Thank you, she said quickly, almost relieved. We knew you'd understand. That's what we love about you, Marissa. You're so reasonable. She hung up. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I sat there on the bedphone, still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence of a call that had ended and a childhood that finally, painfully made sense. A few moments passed, seconds that felt like hours before the dam inside me cracked. I bent forward, burying my face in my hands, as sobs tore through me, sharp and raw, pulled from a place I didn't know still existed. All those years I thought I was imagining it. All those moments when I told myself I was being too sensitive. All those times I convinced myself I misunderstood that they did love me, that I was part of this family if I just tried harder. But the truth was right there in that message. Only family. I pressed my palm against my mouth, desperate to silence the sounds breaking out of me. I cried until I couldn't anymore, until my chest ached and my head throbbed and my body felt emptied out. When I finally lifted my head, the room was blurry, the morning light, too bright, too sharp. My dress for the dinner lay draped across the chair, a reminder of the hope I'd had just a day before. I stood unsteadily, wiped my face, and forced myself to breathe. I needed to move. To do something. Anything. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed my phone again. I scrolled through old photos, Thanksgivings, birthdays, graduations. In almost every picture, I wasn't in the center. I wasn't even beside them. I was behind the camera, off to the side, holding coats, arranging food, taking photos of everyone else. The realization settled heavy in my bones. I had always positioned myself out of the frame, and they were perfectly fine leaving me there. My phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the bank. Upcoming payment, Florence rent, 24 hours left to approve. A bitter laugh escaped me. They didn't want me at the dinner, but they still expected my money. I stared at the screen, fingers curling slowly around the phone. A sudden thought rose inside me, sharp and clear. If they won't have me as family, why am I acting like one? I placed the phone down gently on the counter, breathing evenly for the first time in hours. A loud knock startled me from the doorway. I flinched. Then a familiar voice came through. Marissa, Hannah's voice, small, tense. "Can we talk?" My heart twisted painfully. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what she had to say. I wasn't sure if I could take another blow. But I walked toward the door anyway, because some part of me knew this moment, this conversation, was going to change everything. I didn't open the door right away. I stood with my hand hovering over the knob, breathing slowly, listening to the faint sound of Hannah shifting her weight on the other side. For years I had always been ready to help, ready to comfort, ready to fix. But now, after everything Linda had said and everything the silver box revealed, I felt something different rising in me. Not anger, not fear, something sharper, something clearer. I finally turned the knob. Hannah stood there with her hood up, rain dripping from the ends of her hair, mascara smudged in thin gray streaks under her eyes. She looked small, disoriented, guilty even, but I'd learned long ago that guilt and need looked similar on her face. "Hey," she whispered. I stepped aside just enough for her to enter, but not enough to invite closeness. She slid past me, arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold or ashamed. I shut the door behind her. She hovered in the middle of my living room like she didn't recognize the space, or maybe she didn't recognize me in it, standing straighter than usual, not rushing to smooth things over. "Are you okay?" she finally asked, voice unsteady. The question landed strangely. No one in this family had ever asked me that without expecting something from me afterward. "I don't know," I admitted. She bit her bottom lip. "Mom said you were upset." I let out a breathless laugh. "Upset?" "She told me I'm not family." Hannah, her face tightened. "She didn't mean it like that. She said, blood family. Then she said you didn't want me there." Hannah's eyes widened. "I never said that." "Then why didn't you correct her?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted away. "I don't know," she whispered. "Everything feels so messy lately. Messy. That was one word for it." I walked to the kitchen, needing distance, needing something to hold. I poured water into a glass and took a sip, but it tasted metallic, like the quiet rage I'd been swallowing for years. Hannah followed slowly, as if unsure whether she was welcome. "Look," she began, "Mom said you might be overthinking all this." I turned, setting the glass down harder than I meant to. "I'm not overthinking. I'm remembering." Her brow creased, confused. "I'm remembering every time I was left out," I said. "Every birthday no one celebrated. Every picture I wasn't in. Every time you needed something and Mom told me I was the responsible one, meaning I'd take care of it. Every time she said you were the real daughter, Hannah flinched. And now I continued she's making decisions about my money and my legal responsibility without my permission. Mom didn't mean, Hannah, I cut in my voice firm. She forged my signature on your lease. Silence. Her lips parted. What your landlord emailed me as the primary guarantor, with a contract that has my signature magically attached. I didn't sign anything. Her face paled. Mom said she'd take care of the paperwork. Yeah, I said quietly. She did. For a moment, Hannah just stood there absorbing the magnitude of it. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, stunned. I didn't know she did that. Did you ever ask? I asked gently. Did you ever ask where the money was coming from, or what I was risking, or what I could lose? She looked down at her hands. I thought, you didn't mind. You always say yes, you always help, and you never wondered why I asked. Hannah blinked, tears filling her eyes. Because you're the good one. I shook my head. No. Because I was taught to be. Because someone had to be. She let out a shaky breath. Mom has always said you're different. Different. The word Valerie used suddenly echoed in my mind. A label placed on me before I even knew who I was. What did she tell you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hannah hesitated. Then quietly, that you were adopted because Dad insisted. That you didn't need as much. That I was the one who needed attention. And that you'd always take care of things because you're strong. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the ache pulse behind them. It wasn't that I hadn't suspected these things. It was hearing them spoken aloud from Hannah's mouth that hurt more than I expected. And did you ever ask yourself, I said softly, what taking care of everything was doing to me? She looked at me with a kind of dawning horror. I didn't think. I'm sorry, Riss. I really am. I wanted to believe her. Some part of me did. But apology alone wouldn't fill the void Linda carved through me for 30 years. I walked to the window, staring at the rain streaking down the glass in thin rivers. She told me I wasn't invited because the dinner was for family only, I said. And she said it would be awkward for you if I came. What? Hannah whispered. Why would she say that? You tell me. Hannah sank onto the edge of the couch as though her legs could no longer hold her. This is not how I wanted things, she said. I didn't ask her to do any of this. But you didn't stop her either, I replied. Her shoulders shook. I didn't know how. And for a moment I saw it, really saw it. Hannah had been raised in a pedestal-sized cage. One built from Linda's anxiety, her expectations, her control. Hannah wasn't free. She was curated, sculpted. Just as I had been shaped into the opposite, the helper, the quiet one, the one who absorbed the burden so the golden child could shine. We were both raised to play roles, but only one of us had paid for both. I sat across from her, feeling an unfamiliar steadiness spread through me, something like resolve, something like clarity. Do you know what Valerie told me yesterday? I asked. Hannah shook her head. She said, Mom adopted me to teach you compassion, not to love me, not to raise me as her own, but to give you someone to measure goodness against. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled instantly. No, she whispered. She wouldn't. She did, I said, voice soft but unbreakable. And she kept that story going your entire life. Hannah began to cry, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believed her. But believing didn't erase the truth. A long silence stretched between us, heavy, honest, necessary. Finally, I stood the movement, slow but certain. I need you to understand something, I said. I love you. I always have. But I can't keep being the one who holds everything together. I can't keep saving you, not when it costs me pieces of myself. Hannah nodded, tears spilling over again. I get it, she whispered. I'm starting to get it. My phone buzzed again on the counter, breaking the moment. I glanced at it. A notification from the bank. Florence rent payment due in 12 hours? I stared at the screen. Then at Hannah. Then at the window. For the first time, the weight of expectation didn't settle on my shoulders. It slid off completely. I exhaled slowly. I need some time, I told her. Hannah nodded, wiping her face, understanding more in that moment than she ever had before. She left quietly, closing the door behind her without another word. When the latch clicked, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like space. It felt like the beginning of something new, something I denied myself for 30 years. A life where I didn't have to beg for belonging. A life where I didn't have to be the good girl to be loved. A life where I could finally choose myself. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, watching the faint glow of passing headlights slide across the walls, as if time were trying to remind me that it was moving forward even if I felt stuck in place. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the forged signature. I heard Linda's voice saying, "Be a good girl." I felt the sting of only family. By the time dawn crept into the room, pale and cold, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't a sudden burst of courage or some dramatic epiphany. It was quieter than that, like a whisper I'd ignored for decades had finally grown loud enough to hear. "You don't have to keep doing this." Around 7 a.m., my phone buzzed with a new email. Still half asleep, I reached for it. Urgent payment reminder. Florence rent due in 15 hours. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. 15 hours. 15 hours before the system automatically pulled $2,050 from my account and sent it across the ocean for an apartment I wouldn't even be allowed to step into, for a sister who didn't defend me, for a mother who didn't consider me family. I swung my legs off the bed, sat perfectly still, and whispered into the quiet room no more. I walked to my laptop, opened the banking app, and stared at the glowing numbers. My finger hovered over the pending transfer like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Then, with one breath, one decision, one long overdue act of self-respect, I tapped hold payment. The screen flashed transfer on hold, pending cancellation. A wave of something warm relief maybe washed through me. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From freedom. Before I could process it, another email arrived. Your lease cosign has been validated. Funds will be withdrawn within hours. I nearly laughed. Validated? By who? Certainly not by me. Instead of spiraling, I stood up, grabbed my phone, and called the airline. It rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. Good morning. How may I help you? I cleared my throat. I need to cancel a flight I booked for Hannah Cole. There was the usual back and forth, last name, confirmation code, flight date. Then a pause. There will be a $500 cancellation fee. The remaining balance will be refunded to the card on file. That's fine, I said, though my stomach twisted at the loss. But losing $500 hurt less than losing myself. Reason for cancellation? The agent asked. I exhaled slowly. Because the ticket was never mine to buy. When the cancellation email hit my inbox minutes later, I felt something break loose in my chest. Not regret, not guilt, but a weight lifting. A chain snapping. One down. I opened my email and drafted a message to the Florence landlord. Please remove my name from all lease agreements. I did not authorize its use, and I will not be acting as a guarantor. Before sending, I hesitated just long enough to acknowledge the fear rising in my throat. This was the part of the story where I usually surrendered. Where I gave in. Where I apologized even when I wasn't wrong. Not anymore. I hit send. A minute later, the landlord replied. If you withdraw as guarantor, the entire lease may be invalid, unless Miss Cole qualifies independently. I typed back, I understand. Remove me. My hands trembled as I placed the phone down. For years, I had been the safety net, the rescuer, the fixer. The invisible backbone of a family that had no problem excluding the person who held it together. I wasn't doing it anymore. My phone started vibrating, Hannah's contact photo flashing on the screen. I let it ring. Then ring again. Then again. I didn't pick up. On the fourth call, a voicemail came through. I played it on speaker. Marissa, what did you do? The landlord called me. My apartment is invalid. And the airline says my flight's canceled. You can't just back out, now I need this. How could you do this to me? She was crying. But there was anger threaded through every word. Then, a second voicemail. I swear to God if you don't fix this, Mom said she'll call every relative and tell them how selfish you're being. You're ruining everything. Then a third. I didn't mean that. I'm panicking. Please call me back. Please. I need you. The whiplash of blame to pleading was a familiar cycle. A cycle I had fed with every silent, yes, every second chance, every dollar, every apology. Not today. My phone buzzed again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. Marissa, it's Aunt Rose. What on earth is wrong with you? Hannah is devastated. Fix this immediately. Then Marissa, this is Uncle Ted. Don't do this to your sister. She relies on you. Step up. Then Cousin Jackie here. This is not the time for drama. I let the messages pile up one after another. My phone buzzed until it grew hot in my hand, but I didn't respond. Not to any of them. The silence I held on to wasn't passive. It wasn't avoidance. It was a boundary. I set the phone face down on the counter just as another message came through, a voice note from Linda this time. With a breath I didn't realize I was holding, I pressed play. Her voice was icy sharp, almost shaking with fury. You are unbelievable, Marissa. After everything your father and I have done for you, after we took you in, after we raised you, this is how you repay us. You are sabotaging your sister's life. Fix the lease, fix the flight, fix everything. Do not make me come over there. A beat of silence. Then the last line came out in a low, venomous whisper. You owe us. Owe us. The same words Valerie had warned me about. I felt the anger rise, not explosive, not wild, but quiet. Steady. Controlled. Like a flame finally given room to burn. I blocked Linda's number with a single tap. A moment later, I blocked Hannah's. Then, the relatives. When the final block was done, my apartment fell into a deep, liberating silence. It wasn't peaceful, not yet. It wasn't warm or comforting or joyful, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, the noise of their demands wasn't swallowing me whole. I took one long, shaky breath and sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling my pulse slow. The clock on my phone read 10:30 p.m. And then a single new notification appeared. New voice message from Dad. My heart stopped. Not Mom. Not Hannah. Not a relative. Just Frank. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. His voice came through, soft, worn, breaking. Marissa, I know what your mother did. And I just want you to know, you deserved better. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I should have. My eyes stung instantly. I'm proud of you, he whispered, for standing up for yourself. Even if it makes everything else fall apart. The message ended. I replayed it. Then again. Then again. Each time the words carved deeper into the cracks inside me, into the place where a daughter had waited her entire life to hear anything close to acknowledgement. When I finally turned off the phone, I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling once more. This time the darkness didn't feel suffocating. It felt open. A beginning instead of an ending. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't scared of losing them. I was relieved to finally be finding myself. I met my father the next afternoon at a small coffee shop halfway between his house and mine, a quiet place with wide windows and soft music playing low enough that you could actually think. He was already seated when I walked in, a paper cup in front of him, unopened, as if he'd been waiting to share the moment with me. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe he'd always looked like this, and I had been too busy trying to earn my place in the family to notice the lines around his eyes, the slump in his shoulders, the way he carried regret like an invisible weight. When he saw me, he stood offering a tentative smile. Marissa. Hey, I whispered. We sat. A moment passed, the kind that stretches thin and fragile, waiting for someone to speak first. "I ordered your latte," he said gently. "Vanilla. Extra shot." He pushed it toward me. I blinked. It shouldn't have hit me so hard that he remembered something so small, but it did. Linda never remembered. Hannah never asked, but he had noticed. "Thank you," I murmured. He nodded, clearing his throat, his fingers tightening around the cardboard sleeve on his cup. "I know things have escalated. I thought we should talk before they get worse." A humorless laugh escaped me. "You mean before Mom tries to show up at my door again?" He sighed deeply. "Your mother is struggling with all of this." A familiar sting pricked the back of my eyes. "She told me I'm not family, Dad." His shoulders flinched barely, but enough to see the truth in it. "I know," he whispered. "And I told her she was wrong." Silence fell between us, heavier this time. I watched him, searching for the man I always hoped he'd be, someone who defended me, someone who saw me, someone who felt like a father. For the first time, I think he did. "Marissa," he said quietly, "I am so sorry." The words felt like a gust of wind knocking the breath from my lungs. I gripped the edge of the table without meaning to. "I should have stood up for you years ago," he continued. "I should have stopped the way your mother compared you and Hannah. I should have made sure you felt like my daughter, not like a guest." My voice trembled as I forced out, "Why didn't you?" He looked down at his hands as if the answer was written in the wrinkles across his knuckles. "Your mother is forceful. I've spent our entire marriage trying to keep the peace, and I thought you were okay. You were so strong, so capable. It was easy to convince myself you didn't need me." I pressed my lips together, absorbing the ache of that truth. "I needed you," I whispered, "even when I didn't say it." He nodded slowly. "I know. I see that now." A waitress walked by with a tray, the smell of warm pastries filling the air. The ordinary rhythm of the cafe felt painfully out of place for a conversation that was decades overdue. I took a slow sip of my latte, letting the warmth spread through me, grounding me enough to keep listening. Dad exhaled deeply. "I heard about the forged signature, about the lease, about everything." My throat tightened. "I didn't know she did that," he said. "But when I confronted her, she didn't deny it." "Of course she didn't. Your mother believes she's doing all this for Hannah," he went on. "But she doesn't see how deeply she's been hurting you." I looked out the window, watching cars pass, watching strangers walking by with bags and dogs and normal lives. Did they know how lucky they were to walk through life without questioning their place in their own family? "Dad," I whispered. "I blocked her." He nodded. "Good." I snapped my gaze toward him, shocked. He met my eyes with a steadiness I hadn't seen before. "You needed to. For your sanity, you did the right thing." Warmth spread through me, sharp and unfamiliar, but deeply comforting. "She's furious," he added. "She spent the morning on the phone with relatives insisting you've betrayed the family." I scoffed. "She betrayed me." "I know," he said again, softer this time, "and I told her that." I blinked, startled. "You defended me." "Of course," he said. "I should have done it a long time ago." A quiet, trembling breath escaped me. For 30 years I waited for someone in this family to choose me. Just once. Today he did. He looked down again, then back up with something raw in his expression. "There's more you should know." His fingers tapped nervously against the table. "About when we adopted you." My stomach clenched. I had a feeling I already knew where this was going. Valerie's letter had given me more truth than I'd ever had the courage to seek. Still I nodded. "Tell me." He swallowed. "I wanted you. I pushed for it. I told your mother we had enough room in our hearts for 2 kids. His voice cracked. "And she told me she didn't know how to love a child who wasn't biologically hers." A pin dropped somewhere inside my chest. But he continued, "I told her we'd figure it out together. I told her we'd make you feel at home." "And did you?" I whispered. "I thought we did," he said. "But over time I realized she treated you differently. And whenever I brought it up, she shut me down, told me I was imagining things." I pressed my hand against my heart, feeling the bruise of every moment I'd been pushed aside. "You were my daughter," he continued. "You still are. But I made the mistake of letting your mother steer the dynamic. And you paid the price." A tear slid down my cheek before I even felt it fall. He reached across the table hesitantly, almost afraid, and placed his hand over mine. "But not anymore," he said. "I'm not letting her do this to you again." I swallowed hard. "It might be too late." He squeezed gently. "It's not." We sat there for a while, hands together, two people trying to rebuild something fragile and long neglected. He told me that he'd spoken to Hannah too, that she was crying, overwhelmed, confused, but also starting to recognize the patterns she'd been raised inside of. "She wants to talk to you again," he said, "but she wants to do it right this time." "I don't know if I can trust that," I admitted. He nodded. "You don't have to decide right away." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. "She asked me to give you this." My name was written on the front in Hannah's handwriting. I didn't open it yet. Dad stood hesitating for a moment before leaning down to kiss the top of my head the way I always wished he would have when I was a little girl. "I love you, Marissa," he said quietly. I should have said it more. Then, he walked out. I sat there long after he left, staring at my coffee cup, at the letter, at the space where he had sat. The world outside the window moved on as if nothing had changed, but everything had. My mother was furious. My sister was unraveling. My relatives were gossiping. My bank account was safe, and my father finally was on my side. A strange, trembling calm washed through me. This wasn't the end of the storm. It was the moment I finally realized I wasn't standing in it alone. I sat at my dining table staring at the envelope my father had handed me. My name, just my name, was written in Hannah's handwriting, small and rounded, the same way she used to write little notes and stick them to the refrigerator when we were kids. Back then, they were messages like, "Marissa, don't forget your lunch," or "I borrowed your sweater," or "I ate your leftovers, sorry," harmless, immature, normal. But this envelope wasn't any of those things. I didn't open it right away. I turned it over in my hands, feeling its weight, not the actual paper, but what it represented. An apology, a plea, or another attempt to pull me back into the role I had finally stepped out of. The room felt too quiet, too still, so I stood up abruptly and walked to the window. Rain was tapping against the glass, soft but relentless, like a memory trying to get in. When I finally tore the envelope open, a folded sheet of notebook paper slipped out. Not fancy stationery, not an email, not a typed apology, just plain paper lined and creased. Familiar. I unfolded it. "Riss, I know I've been a terrible sister." My throat tightened. "I don't have excuses. I was raised to believe you'd always be there. Raised to believe you were the strong one. Raised to believe Mom knew what was best." I sucked in a slow breath, letting the words settle, letting the truth sting. "I didn't realize how many things I took for granted, how many times you stepped in and saved me, how much you gave, how much I didn't give back." A tear slid down my cheek before I even realized I'd started crying. "I'm sorry about the dinner. I didn't know about what Mom told you until after the fact. I would never have told her to keep you away. I wanted you there. You're my sister." My fingers tightened around the paper. "I can't undo what Mom did. I can't change how she treated you growing up. But I can change how I treat you now." Then, in shakier handwriting, "I'm going to London. But not the way I planned. Dad helped. But I'm going to pay everything back, him and you. I need to stand on my own, not on your back." I let out a shaky exhale. "I know you're hurt. And I know you don't trust me. But please don't shut the door forever. I want to rebuild. I want to earn your trust. I want you in my life, as my sister, not my safety net." The letter ended there, signed with a simple Hannah. I sank into my chair, the paper trembling in my hands. For the first time, I felt the smallest hint of something that looked like real remorse. Real accountability. Not the performative kind, not the "I need something" kind. Real. But real didn't mean fixed. And remorse didn't erase 32 years of imbalance. I folded the letter and placed it gently on the table, then rested my forehead in my hands, breathing slowly until the world steadied. My phone buzzed, suddenly cutting through the silence. A text from an unknown number. "Marissa, it's your cousin Georgia. Look, I know everyone's been messaging you. I want you to know some of us see what's happening, and we're on your side." I blinked. On my side, that was new. A second message came through. "Linda's been calling everyone saying you're breaking the family, but she's not telling them what she did. We heard from your dad. We know the truth. If you need space, take it. You're doing the right thing." I stared at the message, stunned. Georgia wasn't someone I was close to, but she was one of the few relatives who had always treated me kindly during holidays. The idea that someone outside the inner circle had heard the truth and believed it was unexpectedly relieving. I typed back, "Thank you." Minutes later, another text arrived, this time from my father. "Your mom is saying she wants to talk. Don't respond unless you want to. Your boundaries matter." I reread the message twice, letting the meaning sink in. Your boundaries matter. I had waited my entire life to hear that from someone in my family. I put the phone down and wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. My apartment felt warmer now somehow, as if the air had shifted with these small but meaningful cracks of validation. I spent the next hour cleaning, something I always did when my mind was too full. I folded blankets, wiped counters, organized the mail. Each small task pulled me out of the emotional whirlwind. But when I opened the top drawer of my desk to put something away, my fingers brushed against the Florence folder again, the one with all the receipts, transfers, estimates, and travel plans. I lifted it slowly. $9,600. Months of planning. Hours of researching neighborhoods and safety statistics. Nights spent looking at maps, calculating rent, watching Hannah's excitement grow, while telling myself I was happy to fund it. All of it rooted in the same desperate, aching hope. Maybe this time they'll see me. I closed the folder. Then for the first time, I put it away, not on the desk where I could see it, not in the stack of to-dos, but in the drawer beneath it. Out of sight, not erased, but no longer my responsibility. My stomach growled, suddenly reminding me that I hadn't eaten since yesterday. I grabbed my keys and walked to the cafe down the street, the one where the barista always spelled my name correctly and the chairs were mismatched in a comforting way. When I walked in, the warmth enveloped me instantly. People chatted softly. A child laughed. Someone typed loudly on a laptop. The normalcy of it steadied me. I ordered soup and bread, found a quiet table near the window, and let myself breathe. While eating, I watched a family of 5 at a table nearby, 2 parents, 3 kids laughing and passing French fries around. One of the little boys spilled his drink, and the mom just laughed, wiping it up gently before kissing the top of his head. There was no tension, no hierarchy, no invisible wounds, just family. A small ache pressed against my ribs. Grief, yes, but also something gentler. Acceptance. Not every family looks like the one you get. Sometimes it looks like the one you choose. I wiped my mouth, sat back, and let that truth settle in my bones. When I finished my meal and stepped back outside, the rain had stopped. The pavement glistened under the dull afternoon light, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel trapped under a cloud. As I walked home, my phone buzzed again. A message from Dad. "Will you come to the rescheduled farewell dinner? Not the one your mother planned? Hannah is arranging this one. She wants you there." I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Cars passed. A dog barked somewhere. A breeze brushed my cheeks. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I could face Linda. I didn't know if I was ready to be in a room where part of me still felt like the outsider even after everything. But then I thought of the letter, of Hannah trying, of Dad defending me, of the way I'd finally begun choosing myself. I typed slowly. "When is it?" He replied within seconds. "Tomorrow evening, at the place you always liked, The place I always liked, not the place Linda liked, not the place Hannah preferred, mine. Something shifted in me, not forgiveness, not closure, but the start of a bridge, a tentative possibility. I typed "I'll think about it," and for the first time in my life, that was enough. I arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I needed a buffer between myself and whatever emotional ambush might follow. The place was warm and softly lit with the faint smell of rosemary bread drifting from the kitchen. I had chosen this restaurant years ago for my birthdays, though most of those dinners ended with Linda asking the waiter to split the check or Hannah insisting she forgot her wallet. Tonight, though, the room felt different, like it belonged to me again. I sat at a corner table near the window, the one I always liked, and wrapped my hands around a cup of tea the waiter brought without being asked. Maybe he remembered me. Maybe he just sensed I needed something warm to hold. The restaurant door opened and Hannah stepped inside. She looked different, not polished or glamorous the way she usually tried to be when she wanted something, just simple, nervous, honest. She spotted me immediately and walked over her steps slow, uncertain. "Hey," she said softly. I nodded. "Hi." She sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence didn't feel hostile, it felt fragile, like we were both afraid to say the wrong thing. "I'm glad you came," she finally whispered. I took a breath. I said I'd think about it. Her lips pressed into a sad smile. "I know. And I'm glad you said yes." She fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, then reached into her bag and pulled out another envelope. Not white, not cheap. A pale blue one this time, hand addressed. "What's this?" I asked. "A copy," she said. "Of the repayment plan I signed? Dad has the original." I blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to bring this." "Yes, I did," she said firmly. "I need you to see that I'm serious." I opened the envelope and unfolded the paper. It wasn't a vague promise or empty words. It was detailed amounts, dates, signatures, consequences if she missed payments. 24 months. That was how long it would take for her to repay everything. I looked up, unable to hide the disbelief in my eyes. She swallowed hard. I talked to the program director. I asked if I could take a cheaper housing option. "I'm moving into student accommodation. It's tiny and not at all what I imagined, but it's mine. And I'll manage." A strange ache tugged at my chest, sadness for the person she had been, pride for the one she was trying to become. "Why now?" I whispered. "Why change now?" Her eyes glistened. "Because when you pulled your name off the lease, I realized something." She paused. Her throat bobbed as she tried to steady her voice. "I realized that I didn't know how to stand on my own, and that wasn't your job. It never should have been." I released a breath I didn't know I was holding. And she added quietly, "I realized I'd been treating you the way Mom treated you, without even seeing it." I felt the sting of that truth. But I also felt the bravery it took for her to say it. She wiped at her cheek. "I thought I deserved everything, your help, Mom's attention, everyone's support. I didn't see what you were carrying. And now," I asked, "now I see that I expected you to save me every time I messed up. But that wasn't love. That was dependence. And entitlement." She looked away, ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all the years I didn't notice. Or didn't want to notice." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." She exhaled shakily, then reached for something else in her bag. A bracelet, silver, simple, engraved with a tiny Florence skyline. "I got this for you," she said, "not as a thank you for the money, but because I want you to come visit me, when you choose to, when you feel ready. Not because I need you, because I want you." The gesture was small, but meaningful and genuine. A waiter approached, asking for our orders. We both chose something light, neither of us hungry, both of us trying to navigate emotions stronger than any meal could soothe. As we waited, Hannah leaned forward. "Can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer." I braced myself. "Okay." "Did you ever feel like you belonged with us?" she asked. My eyes slid down to my hands. Sometimes, I admitted, when Dad would quietly sit with me in the mornings while I did homework, or when you brought me soup that time I was sick, or when we were little and you'd climb into my bed because you were scared of thunderstorms. She smiled faintly. I remember that, but most of the time, I continued, I felt like I was tolerated, useful, expected to behave perfectly because anything less would have been too much for Mom. Hannah nodded slowly, her expression troubled. She always said you were the easy one. I didn't understand what that meant until now. Easy meant invisible. My chest tightened. Yeah. Do you want a relationship with me? She asked, voice soft. Not the one we had. A new one. One where I'm not constantly taking and you're not constantly giving. I considered it. Truly considered it. The answer wasn't automatic. It wasn't dictated by guilt or obligation. It wasn't born from 32 years of being asked to sacrifice myself for the sake of family harmony. It came from the quiet, steady place inside me that had begun to heal. Yes, I said, I do. She breathed out, relief washing over her. But I added gently, it has to be different. I can't be responsible for you anymore. Not financially, not emotionally, not as a fallback. I understand, she said immediately, and I agree. We talked through the rest of dinner, not about money, not about the program, not about Linda. We talked about Florence and what she hoped to learn. About my job, which she had never asked about before. About the possibility of meeting halfway, not just geographically, but emotionally. An hour passed, then 2. By the time we reached dessert, the tension had eased into something unfamiliar but welcome space. Respect. Cautious hope. When we finally stepped outside, the air was cool and crisp, the sidewalk glistening from an earlier drizzle. Hannah hugged me. Not the clingy, needy hugs from the past, but a gentle, grateful one. I love you, Riss, she whispered. I held her carefully. I love you too. But we're doing this differently now. She nodded, pulling back with a watery smile. Good, because I need different. I watched her walk toward her car, her steps steadier than I'd seen in years. When she turned back to wave, the streetlight caught the silver bracelet in her hand. The moment felt small and monumental. When I drove home, I didn't feel defeated, or obligated, or burdened. I felt something new. Something I hadn't felt since I was a child, waiting at the top of the stairs, hoping someone would call me down for a picture I never got to be in. For once, I felt chosen. Not by them, but by me. I woke early on the morning of Hannah's departure, not because I needed to be anywhere, but because my mind felt unusually clear, as if some heavy fog had finally lifted overnight. The apartment was quiet, washed in soft gray light from the cloudy sky outside. I made coffee, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and let myself breathe into the stillness. For the first time in years, I didn't wake weighed down by obligation or worry. There was no urgent text from Linda demanding something, no panicked call from Hannah begging for help, no guilt twisting in my stomach about what I should be doing. Just quiet. And space. And myself. Around 9, my phone buzzed. A simple message from Dad. Leaving for the airport in an hour. Hannah asked if you want to ride with us. No pressure. Entirely your choice. Your choice. 2 words I had rarely been offered before. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, I'll drive separately. I'll meet you there. The drive to the airport felt strangely peaceful. Rain clouds hung low, but the roads were clear. I played music, not the kind I usually put on to drown things out, but the soft songs I used to love before my life, revolved around fixing other people's crises. When I pulled into the airport parking garage, my heartbeat picked up. No matter how much healing had begun, old habits tugged at me like invisible threads. I still half expected Linda to appear out of nowhere with a sharp comment. I still feared walking into a scene where I'd be invisible again. But when I found them at the entrance, Dad and Hannah standing side by side, something inside me eased. Linda wasn't there. Hannah noticed me first and waved bright-eyed despite the lack of sleep. Dad smiled softly. Neither rushed me, neither demanded anything from me. They simply waited. I approached slowly. "Hey," I said. Hannah hugged me warm and quick. "You came." "I said I would," I replied, and this time it felt true, not performative, not pressured, not desperate. We walked inside together. Hannah's suitcase wheels clicked rhythmically across the floor. Dad carried her backpack. I held nothing but my purse and an unfamiliar lightness. At the check-in counter, Hannah's hands trembled as she handed over her passport. She let out a shaky laugh. "I can't believe this is really happening." "You earned this, Dad," said gently. "And you're going to do great," I added. She glanced at me this time, not with expectation or entitlement, but with gratitude. "Thanks, Riss." When her bags were tagged and sent off, we moved toward the security line. People bustled around us, families saying goodbye, couples embracing friends, taking last-minute photos. Amid the chaos, our little trio felt oddly calm. "This is as far as we can go," Dad said softly. Hannah swallowed hard, then turned to me. For a moment, she hesitated, as if unsure whether she was allowed to ask for anything from me now. "Can I hug you?" she asked. The question alone made my chest tighten. She wasn't assuming. She wasn't taking. She was asking. "Yes," I said. She wrapped her arms around me, fierce at first, then gentler. "I'll make you proud," she whispered. "You already have," I replied. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'll send updates. And photos. And just let me know when you want to visit. I want you to be part of my life there." Part of her life. Not responsible for it. Dad hugged her next. His voice cracked when he told her to be safe. It cracked even more when he said he loved her. She kissed his cheek and promised to call the moment she landed. Then she stepped into the security line, gave one last wave, and disappeared around the corner. Dad and I stood there for a moment, just breathing. "That went better than I expected," he said quietly. "It did," I agreed. We walked out together. The air outside was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Dad turned to me with a hesitant look. "Your mother wanted to come," he said. "But when I told her you would be here, she refused to apologize." I nodded. The ache was there, but it no longer felt like a knife, more like a bruise I could live with. "I can't fix her," I said. "And I'm done trying to fix myself for her." Dad let out a slow breath, one that sounded like release. "I'm proud of you, Marissa. Truly." Hearing it again didn't sting like it used to. This time it warmed me. "Thank you," I whispered. We reached our cars. He hesitated before getting in. "Lunch next week, just us." A year ago, I would have said yes automatically, out of fear or longing or habit. Now I paused, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I wanted to make choices intentionally, not reflexively. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." He smiled and drove off. I remained still for a moment, standing in the middle of the parking lot, with the distant roar of planes above me. A strange and powerful calm washed over me. I wasn't a placeholder anymore. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the background character in their story. I was finally writing my own. When I got home, I made myself tea, opened the curtains wide, and sat at the table with the silver box. Not because I needed the pain inside it to validate mine, but because it reminded me of how far I'd come. I placed Hannah's repayment plan beside it. Then I opened my journal, a practice I'd started weeks earlier in therapy, and wrote, "I didn't lose my family. I lost the version of them who never saw me. And I gained something better. I gained myself. No tears, no heaviness, just truth, and strength, and peace." As the afternoon sun warmed the room, my phone buzzed. A message from Hannah. "Already missing you." I smiled, softly, cautiously, but genuinely. Maybe this time we would build a relationship rooted in respect. Maybe this time she would grow on her own. Maybe this time I would no longer stand on the sidelines of my own life. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally writing a chapter that ended the right way. If you've ever had to walk away from people who didn't see your worth, or if you've ever had to redefine what family means, I hope my story reminded you that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Tell me in the comments if this resonated with you, or if you've had your own moment of finding your voice. If you want more stories like this about healing boundaries and reclaiming your life, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and stay with me for what comes next.